searing loss, the Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon his cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all this world, but give me Jesus.
She taught all of us children to love the Lord God
That Sabbath we could go
and
down
his
or
Son, the
whatnot,
Lord
but
Jesus
I think
Christ.
it is the camp
Thank you,
meeting
Mom.
Sabbath. It
And
might
when
be at camp meeting.
I
Because the people who do the Adventist village are at camp meeting, and then they want some because it's general conference here, and many people from the general conference from St. Louis, yeah, it's the general conference, they might come back and they come over Battle Creek and see the Adventist village. Why is Battle Creek important? Because Battle Creek used to be the Mecca of the Adventists, used to be Salt Lake City of the Mormons, right? Before 1902, and Adventists exited Battle Creek. But that's where we had the general conference, that's where we had the printing press, that's where we had the sanatorium, that's where we had the college, that's where everything was conglomerated. And you know, Ellen White always said, we need to move away from, we should not all be conglomerated on one spot until 19 02, when in February the sanatorium burned down, and in December 30 the publishing house burned down, and then the people realized, okay, we need to exit. And of course, prior to that, Emmanuel Missionary College, or the Battle Creek College, came to Berrien Springs, and then the General Conference went to Washington, D.C., and the Review and Herald, the publishing house, went there, and so on. Okay, so as far as Adventist history, the book. Now, if you are saying we want to grasp a little bit of history of Adventist history in Battle Creek with Adventist Village, that's what I would suggest whatever Sabbath or whatever week. I think they do even tours during the week if you arrange it ahead of time. They can do this kind of things. Now, if you are saying, hey, I can't digest 600 pages, a little bit too much of a read for me, George Knight has written Anticipating the Advent. I think there's a new edition of it. It looks a little bit nicer than mine. So a brief history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So within about 130 pages, and not so big print and all the rest. So you should be through. You should get a kind of a nice glimpse over Adventist history. So George Knight, Anticipating the Advent. The title, Anticipating the Advent. Yeah. So I think the new edition has something like a brief history of Seventh-day Adventist of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So this is the older edition. I think in the meantime there's a new edition of it. So George Knight has also written some other books. For example, he has written a book that I didn't bring with me, but in the similar style of this, there are 4 of these, The World of Ellen White. The World of Ellen White, and you should find these books either in a church library that has them dusted away and nobody reads them any longer. The World of Ellen White deals basically, what did the 19th century look like? People would never bathe. People would be afraid to open the window because opening the window would be bad, right? Fresh air was bad. Eating vegetables was unhealthy. Yeah, we need to understand. You understand what the health message that Ellen White gave is, what revolutionary thinking it was in a time where people would never have a bath. They would, in their whole lifetime, they would never bathe. Yeah, but that's what it is. So, and The World of Ellen White, in that book, he kind of tells a little bit of how diseases and how milking was being done and how cows were sick and all this kind of stuff. So that's as far as The World of Ellen White. Then he has written a book on meeting Ellen White. Here in this book, you get a little bit, okay, her childhood, her growing up as a Methodist, being afraid of hell, especially after the accident and when she was so frail and she was about to die and all the rest, and then her writing or her calling of God and the first visions, and then her writing ministry, and then her family, and then the death of James White in 1881, and then how the children and which children had kids themselves, and she had grandkids from them. It was only Willie, because 2 of them, remember, Herbert as well as Herbert and what was Henry, the 16-year-old, and Herbert, he died in a few months. So the 2 of them died prematurely. So meeting Ellen White, and then he has Walking with Ellen White. This would be a book, so you get some insight of what did Ellen White like. Kind of, she liked sailing with sailing boats. She liked visiting. They would have a piece of land in Colorado where she would walk in the mountains, where she would hike in the mountains. She didn't like the horseback riding and the caravans. Remember when they came out of Texas and they had these horse caravans, and that was not her favorite stuff, right? James White liked to ride the horses. Some tensions that they also had in their marriage. It's a very honest book. Remember, James White has a stroke in 65. And then Ellen White takes James, John Loughborough, and who else was it? Uriah Smith, Loughborough, and James White. She takes them to our house on the hill in Danceville, New York. It was by Dr. Jackson, a health institute. And Dr. Jackson says the problem with your husband is because they would meet in the morning for prayer, they would meet at lunch for prayer, and they would meet in the evening for prayer. And Dr. Jackson says the problem with you is that you are too religious. That's why your husband doesn't get well. So you need to get more into dancing, you need to get more into relaxation, you need to get more into card playing, you need to take it more easy life. And that's when Ellen White says, no. James, you come home. And as they are coming from Danceville, New York, in Rochester, on December 25th, 1865, she has the vision to start our own health institute. And that's when they come back in 66, and the Western Health Institute in Battle Creek is built. And then in 66 comes also the Health Reformer, the journal out. And then 10 years later, in 76, the 23-year-old John Harvey Kellogg takes over, changes the name, and it becomes the Battle Creek Sanatorium, right? So you kind of get those kind of stories here. And then this is a book, and I'm taking some ideas from there for today, reading Ellen White. Reading, okay, how do we read Ellen White? We take into consideration all her statement, time and place, context, all these kind of things, right? So, okay, that's kind of where I want. Now, Judd Lake, he used to teach, I don't know if he still teaches at Southern Adventist University. He has written a book on Ellen White Under Fire, meaning what have people from plagiarism, all the other claims that, and he deals with some of those questions in this book, Ellen White Under Fire. Because you go online today, let's suppose Jonathan goes to Texas and somebody says, oh, you Adventist, and goes online and says Adventist, oh, and then, oh, they have a prophet, and you find so much trash. So it is good to have to read something and get it somehow objectifiable before you deal with people, because there's a ton of like you know how the internet is. The internet has a ton of good things and a lot of not so good things. So, Ellen White Under Fire. So, yes, please. Both the sanatorium as well as the printing press were in problems. Remember, we have the crisis of 1901, the organizational crisis. Ellen White comes after the almost 10 years of staying in Australia between 1891 to 1900. She comes back to the United States. When she comes back, what does she find in the United States? A church that has grown numerically, exponentially. The problem is we still have General Conference, and the conference is the local conference. Nothing in between. What she has experienced in Australia was that Daniels and others, looking at the model at Robinson in South Africa, they had instituted the unions. So they had a different level in which the unions would take care of that, yeah? So she comes back, and she comes right back before the General Conference in 1901, and she meets the brethren in the Battle Creek Library, and she tells them the church is highly overdebted because everybody made debts. You know how it is very often in Adventism. Everything belongs to everybody, and nobody is responsible for anything. Yeah. And that everybody made debts. The educational department made that. The missionary department, everybody made debts. Everybody would send missionaries out. And then, of course, John Harvey Kellogg had the power over a ton of people in Battle Creek. Why? Because he employed 2/3, and 2/3 of the executive committee were people that he employed in the sanatorium. Now, you know how it is when your boss is he has so much leverage, yeah? And then, of course, during the 1901 General Conference, they get rid of the General Conference president, and they are just dealing with an executive committee, which they switch afterwards in 1902 at the General Conference. Yeah? But during this time, Kellogg is in tension with Ellen White. A.T. Jones. Remember A.T. Jones and E.J. Wagner, the heroes of the 1888 General Conference, who brought Adventism back into mainstream Christianity, because Adventism has focused pretty much on the 5 S's. As important as they were, but they have lost focus of Christ, of righteousness by faith. Ellen White says they were as dry as the hills of Gilboa, because they preached only the law. Now, it is nice when you discover something that you preach that, but they, in an unbalanced manner, they lost the other side. That's where E.J. Wagner and A.T. Jones come in and preach righteousness by faith. But the brethren in Battle Creek, the two most powerful brethren, the General Conference President and the editor of the Review and Herald, they are not with them, right? And understandably, because what happens in the 80s, in the United States, in the 1880s, Sunday laws are coming out. These blue laws are coming out. Willie White is arrested because he operated a printing press on Sunday. Some other people down in Texas, because they hoed their potatoes on Sunday, are before the Supreme Court. And now, suddenly, Wagner says the law in Galatia is not the ceremonial law, it is the moral law that is done away with. That is a school master, a tutor towards Christ. And they say, whoa, wait a minute. We see out there what happens. Sunday laws are being given. These two brothers are telling us, oh, the law is done away with. So rightly, the General Conference President and the editor of the Review and Herald, Butler and Uriah Smith, are not liking that. Ellen White is open, and they preach, and they say, that's what we need. That's the message we need. And of course, Butler and Uriah Smith, they are trying to push her that she brings out a statement in which she obviously said, the law in Galatia is the ceremonial law. And she said, it is providential that I lost that quote. And we should study the Bible and figure out from the Bible what the law in Galatia is. Of course, the two leading brothers from Battle Creek don't like that. Yeah? And in the meantime, A.T. Jones has gone in the camp with John Harvey Kellogg. John Harvey Kellogg tends to go into pantheism. Then, of course, afterwards he writes The Living Temple, because Ellen White gave her royalty from the books that were sold towards the education department to pay off the debts, because the education department acquired so many debts. And then John Harvey Kellogg said, oh, if Ellen White can do that, I can do that with my book, and I give the royalties of my book towards the sanatorium. But then Harvey Kellogg said, I will the bigger sanatorium. And in 1902, when Daniels was elected General Conference President, he said, brother, we have had enough of the debts. We will pay as we go. We don't big bigger, but we will build, and then when we have the money, we will build. And we will build as we go. Not like you guys were. But of course, he was very mad, and then A.T. Jones aligns with Kellogg, and then Daniels and Prescott, they try to resist it, and then you have the tensions. And of course, during this time, both John Harvey Kellogg drifting into pantheism, A.T. Jones following them, are becoming very critical, and in 1907, he is disfellowshipped from the church, and then in 1910 we lose the whole sanatorium. But in the meantime, we gain on the West Coast. What health institutions do we gain on the West Coast? Loma Linda. Before that, Paradise Valley in San Diego, Glendale Sanatorium in LA, and then in Chicago, Hinsdale. So these health institutions kind of replace the sanatorium that Kellogg took, and of course, I think somewhere a year or two later he needs to close the old sanatorium because he didn't have any longer students. All right, so that's the history behind those tensions. All right, let's go now a little bit into what is hermeneutics. How you interpret the Bible. The hermeneutics, the term is basically the science or the art of interpreting the scriptures. Hermeneutics means basically the science or the art of how to interpret scripture, or for that matter, how to interpret any literature. There's hermeneutics of scriptures, and there's hermeneutics of Shakespeare. How shall we interpret Shakespeare, right, or whatnot? So, do we interpret the scriptures? But of course, now you are saying, no, I read the scripture as it I take the scriptures as it reads, right? Hey, let's go. I'll open the scriptures. Who would like to read for me? Matthew chapter, I think it's Matthew chapter 19. Let me take my Bible. Matthew chapter 19. Let's see how literally you take the Bible. 21. 19. No, I'm in the wrong chapter, sorry. I meant Matthew 18. Matthew 18, and there, who would like to read verse 8 and 9? Matthew 18, 8 and 9. All right. How many of you have cut off their hands and plucked out their eyes? Doesn't Jesus say so? Did you? Where? Oh. You did. You really did something there, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. But it was not intentional, right? Your hand didn't. So. At least it's literal. Look, why don't you take the scripture as it says there? If your hand has your hand caused you to sin? Has your eye caused you to sin? So why didn't you plug it out? You don't like it. We were, before the girls were born, we were one winter in Austria skiing. And I took some skiing lessons with a guy there, a rookie guy. So, and as we are, here in Michigan, you do cross-country skiing. There we do downhill skiing, right? So, and we're on the lift, and the guy says to me, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I'm a pastor." I said, "What? The pastor?" So he said to me, "Hey, I see that you still have your two hands, and you still have your two eyes." I says, "Doesn't Jesus say that?" So why are you Christians? I can't trust you guys, Christians, because you just pick and choose whatever you want to read in the Bible, and you apply whatever you want in the Bible. And I thought, no, the guy has a point. It was good thing that by the time he told me that, we were on top of and everybody said, I'll tell you when we come up again. So while we're skiing down, we said, man, what do I say this guy? Dear Lord, give me some wisdom to answer the brother. So as we are skiing down the hill, I said, hopefully it lasts at least half an hour so that I have something to say when I'm coming up with him again, right? So, why don't you plug out your hands or your eyes and you cut off your hands? Yeah, and then with adultery you take it seriously. So if you find somebody, if you find an 18-year-old girl in the wrong bed and you say, oh, that's not, just making a point. You say, sister, you should not have done that. But here you say, oh, it's just a point.
Well, there's a difference between Jesus and this 80-year-old woman in somebody else's bed.
No. It's the same. If Jesus says you shall pluck out your eyes or you shall not commit adultery, it's pretty much the same. One is figurative. But you see, what is figurative?
He's using something as an extreme to show an example.
Now, depending on where you are in society, if you say today that lying with a man, you quote Leviticus 18 or 20, lying with a man, they are like you lie with a woman, it's an abomination. if you go today in the LGBTQ community and say that, that's very extreme. They are going probably to lynch you, or at least they're not very favorable towards you, let's put it nicely. So you see, extreme is wherever you stand by. So when we don't like something, it wants to make a point, or we kind of take it symbolically, or it's spiritual, or we symbolize, right? So whatever we don't like to take literally, we kind of fudge it. Oh yeah, I'll come to you and then come to you. Yes, sir. Fair enough, fair enough. But if it is an abomination, why don't we do what he says? Yes, ma'am. Okay, you might have a point. So she says, look, if Jesus meant this literally, what should Judas have done? What would Jesus have recommended to Judas? Okay, because he was with the hand in the money pocket, right? Does he tell Judas to cut off his hand? What did Peter do to Jesus when he was in the courtyard there at the trial at Caiaphas? Did he tell Peter to cut off his tongue? Rachel? So you are saying, hey, he said it, but he did not really mean it literally, right? Is that kind of what you want to say? Fair enough. Now, what I did, I can't remember what I did, but it was something that was concocted out of my stomach. It was probably nothing serious, so I can't remember what I told him. I only remember the question, and I was kind of puzzled because I never really thought about very deeply. So in the meantime, I've done a little bit, but at that time I don't think. So I kind of, whatever I did, I can't remember what I told him. Sorry?
When I was in Massachusetts,
Uh-huh.
I had some non-Adventist friends who said that they knew an individual who took that particular scripture very seriously
Yes.
and cut off his hand.
Yes. People have throughout history done this kind. They memed themselves. So it's not so that this scripture has never been taken literally. It has. The point is, did Jesus intend it? Obviously not, because if he would have intended it, he would have encouraged his disciples to do that, right? Okay. Now, what is Jesus then doing when he speaks so radically? No. He says, look, whatever causes you to sin, it needs radical change. Now, does he use what we call today hyperbole? What is hyperbole? Language. Exaggeration, right? So now, do you guys use exaggeration? When? Is she really dying of thirst? No, she's not. She's just dying of thirst. She's just 30. She kind of feels a little bit of, she says, I could have a little bit, right? But she's dying of thirst. Now, what other exaggeration, hyperbolic language do you use? What? Takes forever to go to, probably that's what she thought this morning, right? But you still stayed with us. You were You were not starving, trust me. You see? Okay, Jonathan, Nathan. Namely. All the time. No, all the time. All right. You see, we use hyperbole language. And we understand when we read Jesus' words and we say, look, if he meant it, he would have enforced it. But because he didn't enforce it, we understand hyperbole language to be used hyperbole, right? So we interpret the Bible. Do we have to interpret the scripture, the writings of Ellen White? But of course, somebody has the hand there before I even move. Okay, now, look at this. George Knight uses here a nice example. And it says, in the late 1860s, Ellen White wrote that, quote, eggs should not be placed on your table. They are an injury to your children. End quote. Second Testimony, page 400. Eggs should never be placed on your table. They are an injury to your children. And this is in 1860. And then, in 1901, yet the same author penned the following in 1901. Quote, get eggs of healthy fowl, use these eggs cooked or raw. Drop them uncooked in the best unfermented wine you find. This will supply that which is necessary to your system. Do not for a moment suppose that it will not be right to do this. I say that milk and eggs should be included in your diet. Eggs contain properties which are remedial agencies in counteracting poisons. End quote. Council on Diet and Foods, page 204.
I didn't think you're supposed to have either eggs
So,
or milk.
do you hear the two statements? Eggs should never be placed on your table. And then she writes, 40 years later, you should eat raw eggs, poured in unfermented, the best unfermented wine from the healthiest chickens, and you should drink that because this is day and night. Now, should we eat eggs or should we not eat eggs?
Well, eating and drinking are two different things.
Eating and drinking. Are you telling me that you have a stomach for drinking and a stomach for chewing? And if there would be a cow outside, I would buy that. But in our case, I would not. Yes. What do we do with statements like this? And you understand, what does a strict vegan take? Which quote does he take?
No eggs. Never put them on the table.
He says, sister, how come that you are eating eggs? And what does one who likes eggs do? I'm drinking them raw. So what's your problem? So, do you see, we need to interpret stuff. There's a hand. Yes, please. Fair enough. So was the one for not eating eggs was for another guy who was sick too. Different kind. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe that was the way that you empty your stomach, because that's what it would do to me. A raw egg.
You see how we fudge it? So this must be so that boom. This is not food for the ducks at the lake. This was supposed to be healthy. Healthy remedy. She says these eggs have healthy properties for your issues. Please, we're not talking about half-dead chickens, we're talking about healthy chickens and the best unfermented wine. We're talking about high quality, both eggs as well as unfermented wine. Yes, Miss Blosser.
I've read a lot of her books on health, and another thing that she stresses over and over again is that we need to know our own bodies. What might be good for one person is not necessarily good for another person. So it sounds
I love it.
that in this
Oh,
the context is speaking specifically to people and their needs.
I know my body. You know what my body desires? Chocolate. And it so loves it. It so loves it.
So can I?
You understand? If you're arguing this way, whatever sins we're attracted to, that's what my body desires. And a guy who is into prostitution says, my body just desires it, man. What should you do? I can't do anything against it.
Saying what your body desires, you should know how your system works.
Yeah. Now, I give you, I give you the fact. If we're honest and listen to our bodies, our body tells us quite a bit what is good and what is not good. So I'm with you. But if I go with the argument, look, my body, so for example, alcohol has never been a temptation for me. But I grew up with sweets. I to this day am attracted to, I like sweets. So today for lunch I needed to abstain for the sweet. There was a whole table. Nathaniel said, look, this is nice. And I said, I need to stay away from that. We understand? So all of us have drawings and have temptation that we need to say, okay, I need to restrain, I need to do this kind of that kind. Okay, so what do we do with statement like this? Eggs shall never be placed on your table. And you shall take the healthiest eggs and you should put them in unfermented wine and drink them. Yes, sir.
Could that first saying be before the Lord in life as to the need?
By 1860s, she has had already several visions. She was already in the in the health message, right? So it is not so that this was before she had any visions, before the Lord revealed anything to her, and the other one was afterwards. The first statement is being made to a person, to a family, where the family had several children who struggled with sensuality. Sensuality. And Ellen White makes the statement, eggs should not be placed on your table. They are an injury to your children. She says to the parents, the eggs that you are putting on the table are an injury for your children. The statement that she makes in 1901, she makes to Dr. Kress. Dr. Kress is a medical doctor in Australia. And he took the health message very seriously, meaning he did not eat any dairies. He became a complete vegan. But his health deteriorated. And remember, at that time, we're not talking about supplements, we're not talking about vitamin B12 and vitamin D3 and all this kind of stuff. And she sees, God shows her in vision, Dr. Kress in Australia. And she writes Dr. Kress the letter, and she says, look, you have taken the health message very seriously. The problem is that you have overdone it. And you need to eat eggs from the healthiest chickens and unfermented wine, and you need to drink them either raw, as she's raw, and drink them. And you know what? Kress, he takes the letter, and he took Ellen White seriously. And when she wrote him the letter, he said, if Ellen White says so, because for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, he was a complete vegan. And he says, if Sister White tells me that, I'm not doing that. And afterwards, Dr. Kress says, I took that, somewhere in the book, George and I talks about it, I would have to look closely at it, and hopefully I'm stumbling over it. And then he says, I took that seriously, and I did what she said, and my health improved, and he lived another 30, 40 years. And served, because he was a medical doctor, he served in the Australian sanatorium for another 30, 40 years. He said, she saved my life. I was on the brink of almost dying. But I took the health message serious because I read eggs should never be placed on our table. And that's what he did. And he gave up milk, and he gave up eggs. And Ellen White sees him in vision. The Lord shows him and says, you need to write this man a letter. And she writes him the letter, and she tells him this advice. And he takes it seriously, and he gets better. What does that tell us? What does this experience, these extremes? Eggs should never be placed on your table, and you should eat raw or drink raw eggs. What does that tell us? Context. Different situations have different answers. Time and see, for somebody like this family that struggled with sensuality, she says, mother, father, do not put eggs on your children. So you are injuring your children. And here she sees somebody, says, look, this brother has done a tremendous service, and if he continues this, he needs, and she doesn't argue scientific and says, you know, you have a lag, you are short on vitamin B12. She doesn't argue that way. She says, look, brother, get eggs from healthy fowls. Use these eggs cooked or raw. Use the best unfermented wine and drink it. She doesn't argue and says, what is, because she never argues. She will very often in her books say it makes the blood sour. Now, what does that mean? If you go to the doctor today and say, I think my blood is sour, the doctor says, I think you have eaten too much sour cabbage, right? Or sauerkraut. What does it mean when she talks about it makes the blood sour? Today, what would the doctor say? The pH, you have acidic blood. That's all conducive to worse cancer. Yeah? But she talks in very simple terms. Your blood is sour. This kind of food does make your blood sour. So we see that we need to take into consideration if we interpret Scripture, we also need to interpret her writings. We need to take time, place, and circumstances into consideration when she makes a statement. Not only that, we cannot run only with a statement that we like. If we are vegans, we are saying, sister, how come that you're still eating eggs? Now, sometimes that's what we practice in Adventism. We say, okay, we are vegans. And then we have a guest who comes to the church and says, oh, I kind of like your church and da-da-da-da-da. But the brother or the person is still a meat eater. And they say, brother, have you not heard veganism? I says, vega what? And then we're thinking the brother who has just stepped in the church should be where the sister has lived her last 70 years and should be a vegan. And we don't understand it took us 70 years to come up there. Just give the brother some time. You took some time. Now, you know that she struggled with eating meat. What was she used on the East Coast to eat? Oyster. Shall I tell you a story? Probably you stone me. Somewhere in the 80s, or I think even beginning of 90s, I think in the 80s, late 80s, 1880s, she asks her daughter-in-law to bring her a can of oysters from the East Coast. Now by this time she was long vegetarian and vegan. Not only that, oysters are we'll leave that. But you understand that the point that I wanted to make, why did Satan tempt Adam and Eve? On what did Satan tempt Eve? On food. On what did Satan tempt Jesus? Why? That's where we are vulnerable. So don't underestimate the taste buds. Yeah? So, and if it took you 70 years to reach from where you were a mixed food consumer to veganism, hallelujah, the Lord gave you the victory for that. But don't expect somebody who just come into the church to be in 2 weeks where you reach in 70 years. Yeah? You understand? So we want to be patient with the people we talk to. We want to understand taste buds are a drawer. We need to understand when we interpret it, we need to make sure that we read this statement and that statement and understand to whom did she speak here and why did she speak here. So let me give you some other examples. So highly interesting book to read. Now, do you guys understand the difference between books and compilations? What's the difference between books and compilations? For example, let's since we are on the topic of health. If I give you Ministry of Healing and Counsels on Food and Diets, what's the difference between the two books? One is a compilation, the other one is an entire book. Which is which? Sorry, sir? Counsel on Diets and Foods is a compilation. Ministry of Healing is an entire book. What are compilations? You grab, so the editors, or not the editors, the trustees. You know, when Ellen White died, she set in place trustees over the White estate, right? So we have at the General Conference, we have an Ellen White estate, right? So there are trustees, and sometimes they're saying, okay, the Adventist Church is dealing with health issues. Well, let's put a compilation together. So what is a compilation? We take from all her writings a quote, a paragraph, half a page, the most a page. We give down the source, what it is, and then we take, what did she say on eggs? What did she say on cheese? What did she say on meat? What did she, and then we kind of compile the whole thing, make it a book, and then we bring it up. What is the advantage of a compilation? You have all the sources compiled in one book, right? Now, did Ellen White herself do compilations? Of course. Of course. Of course. With the help of her assistants, when she wrote the Desire of Ages, she took from here, from this vision, from that sermon, from that letter, and she took that. She did compilations during her lifetime. And that's why she was not against making compilations. But when we read today compilations, what should be aware of? The context is missing. Very often we don't have the background. If a counsel is given, like with the egg stuff here, it was given to a certain family facing certain issues. Because what happens when you read a compilation and apply everything to yourself? Or most of the time we don't even apply to ourselves, we apply to others. Are you with me? But what is the problem? Let's suppose we are sanctified Adventists and we apply to ourselves. What happens when we take a compilation and apply everything to ourselves? It was not all intended. We assume that we have all the problems the whole Adventist world had and everybody had. And suddenly we put on the shoe of everybody. And that's why I'm saying to those who read compilations, some of us are reading them very carefully and apply them. But we don't have all the issues. And we don't have all the diseases. And that's why we need to understand that compilations sometimes have statements where the full context is not given to us. That's why it makes sense when you are interested in health, not to start with counsel on foods and diets, but ministry of healing. You are saying, look, I want to hear what has she put together on health and what was her thought or a train of thought about health. Go to ministry of healing. And take it page by page, and you get a balanced approach to what did the Lord reveal to us as far as health is concerned. And then say, okay, how can I apply it to myself? Don't try to go, hey, how can I apply it to the sister next to me in church, right? Or the brother. Yes?
I find it for myself, I find sometimes when I listen to different speakers, sometimes I get an unbalanced view until I hear another speaker addressing that same subject, and I get a much more balanced viewpoint, because otherwise I'm just like, oh, well, this guy over here, like a big deal and everything, and I hear this opposing, very calm perspective on the same topic, and it helps me get a balance on it.
That's why it's important to take all her statement into consideration. In a minute I'm coming there and I'll show you how some people have misapplied that. The next thing is emphasize the important thing. So, first of all, we want to be aware of the context and time and to whom did she write, what did she write. For example, there is quite a division in our church concerning the use of the long and the short towels in the ordinance of humility, writes a person to Willie. I would like to ask you, Brother Willie White, which did Sister White herself use? So obviously there's a church and they have communion, right? Now, what does the Bible tell us? What did Jesus do when he washed the disciples' feet? Girded himself with the towels and then started washing each disciple's foot. So now this brother writes to Willie and says, hey, there is a big dispute because should we have long towels or should we have short towels to wash each other's feet? What did Sister White say? Now, there's more ridiculous thing that's come. If you're laughing here, you will laugh harder further on. Is there anything in her writing concerning this? And lastly, was the use of the long towels common practice in the beginning of the message? Basically, did Ellen White use the long towels at the beginning of the message? Yes, of course, it's a quote. No. You think I'm making stuff up? I'm looking like I make stuff up, but I'm not making stuff up. Willie White's answer to the letter set the matter in proper perspective. He noted that whenever his mother, quote, This is not, I'm quoting, and if you don't believe it, you come afterwards and I'll show you the book and you read it for yourself. Quote, engaged in the ordinance of foot washing, she used such towels as were provided by the deaconesses of the church without comment or criticism. It is my opinion that she regarded such matters as of minor importance, end quote. And the letter is Willie C. White to R. Schaefer, December 15, 1933. So, people have said, okay, let's emphasize on the important issues. Which towels? Some people have. So how some people have done it, right? Well, let me tell you another story here. George Knight says, one document in my file lists, quote, 41 biblical reasons why man should grow beards. You are in, Nathaniel. Listen to this. One of the most fascinating is that according to Matthew 10:30, God has numbered all the hairs on our head. Who could be so arrogant as to cut off what God cared enough to count? Another argument is that God created man with beards, and it is therefore sinful to efface the image of God by shaving. Again, a man shall not wear which pertains to a woman. This Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5. And women have bare faces. Along the same line, the article points out that, quote, the effeminate shall not enter into the kingdom of God, end quote. We are kind of doomed. It's good that you picked on him, not on me. Oh, I see. The clincher to the argument in the manuscript was that, quote, Christ, our example, wore a beard. Other individual Adventists have gotten so carried away with the topic that they have equated shaving with having the mark of the beast in the last days. Shaving, wrote one advocate of abstinence in a document entitled Year 1940, another call for the remnant church, quote, is one of the gods of this world today. So, shaving is one of the gods of this day. When you shave, you are not worshiping God, but the devil. He has tried to change the fourth commandment. Now he's trying to change the first commandment. When you try to improve upon God's handiwork by shaving, you make a sorry mess of it, and you will have to answer for it in the very near future, end quote. No. These are documents or files that George Knight has about how people have tried to emphasize the unimportant things, right? We should not go after the beardy people or the shaved people or the long towels or the short towels. But let me tell you, we might laugh at these people at the beginning of the 20th century, but we sometimes do similar stuff today. James White had tried to put the lid on the religious fascination with shaving in Adventism as early as 1857 by saying that, quote, we must beg to be excused from taking any interest in the question or discussing its merits or demerits in the review, as we cannot look upon it as a biblical question. We design to be neutral, and neutrality nowadays is silent, end quote. So James White didn't even engage in this. He says, look, we're not discussing it, there's neutrality, over with it. But you see how often we get bogged down with unimportant issues, right? So emphasizing the unimportant things. Yes, please.
I
To what places?
Self-supporting
Oh, okay.
and they had a rule that women had to wear skirts and not pants.
Mm-hmm.
And so this particular family was very strict on that. And the little girl who was probably 8 or 9 years old said, Mommy, we have to wear nightgowns only, not pajamas, because what if Jesus comes in the night and we're sleeping in our pajama bottoms? She was afraid she'd be lost if she was caught sleeping in pajama bottoms as opposed to a nightgown. That's really like a kind of bizarre time.
Yeah. In a similar vein, what did Ellen White say? How should the skirts of the ladies be? 8 to 9 inches shorter. Now tell that to a girl who comes with a skirt up to here to church. Tell her 9 inches shorter. The waistband goes over her. Yes, 9 inches short. Yeah, Why did she say that? Yes, they were dragging. First of all, they had these corsets, right? Where they would constrain your intestine, right? Because the woman was supposed to be nicely designed, right? So, then they have the long skirts that drag on. And what did they have on the floor? Mud, manure. What did the guys chew? Tobacco spitting. Remember that Adventist song, chewing the tobacco, spitting, and so on? And what did the women not wear? Underwear, pants. Underwear. So what does that cause? If all the dust, all the dirt is floating in your nice dress. That's why Ellen White says the skirt should be 9 to 10 inches shorter. But you understand, this is time needs to be considered and taken into consideration. If I tell that to a girl who comes to PMC, sits on the platform, and so already high, and I'm sitting here, and I need to look somewhere else because it is what it is. Now tell her that the skirt should be 9 inches short. You understand? All right.
It ceases to be a skirt when she's sitting on it.
All right. Take all available information into account. Study all available information on a topic. Look, in Selected Messages, page 311 through 16, she says, I have received letters questioning me in regard to the proper attitude to be taken by a personal by a person offering prayer to the sovereign of the universe. Where have our brethren obtained the idea that they should stand upon their feet when praying to God? So George Knight goes on and says, my friend pointed out that Ellen White went on to say that the proper position always for prayer is on our knees. Quote, both in public and in private worship. It is our duty, Ellen White says in Selected Messages, page 312. Both in public and in private worship, it is our duty to bow down upon our knees before God when we offer our petition to Him. This act shows our dependence upon God. Why did you sit when we prayed here? Why didn't you go on your knees? Because you were not aware of the statement, right?
No, I'm aware of it, but I feel guilty because getting down on my knees is practically impossible, and then getting back up. And
Okay. But you're still feeling guilty.
yeah,
All right?
I pray every day. I do my
On your knees?
no.
Hmm.
I can barely get up from the
Sorry? You see how we fudge it? So there's no knee replacement, no hip replacement, no this, no that. Or the kneeling pads, right? We need to have those kneeling pads like that Tylers have, right? You are here. Okay, so this is the best. I'm on my knees in my heart. So I'm a vegan in my heart. While I eat meat. So not in my stomach, right? You see how we fudge it? Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. But some people have taken this statement and have said, look, it doesn't matter if we go in church, if we go for lunch, if we go for whatever we need to pray. And always, she says, the proper attitude in prayer is on our knees. Now, what if you are confronted with a statement like that? What do you do? Fair enough. Fair enough. That's a point. So, okay, you look at the Bible where people have prayed in all positions. Now, what do you do if somebody confronts you with a statement of Ellen White like this? You read all of that chapter. So let me see. And then you look. Now, nowadays it's pretty easy. You go on to Ellen White estate and you punch in a keyword and then you have all the statements there, right? You have done that, yeah? So I suspect you have done, you kind of work, you see what has done it. George Knight said, because he talks about the story. He was at his brother's house, the deacon. He was preaching in the church, and then of course they kneeled for every prayer in church. And then he comes home, and then for lunch they just, Brother Knight, you need it, and he did. And George Knight said, man, this is strange. But let me go home and he reads the statement. You know what he says? It's not at all that complicated. I merely kept on reading on the topic of the correct position in prayer. In this case, I didn't have to read very far. On the last page of the section, I quoted from 3:11 in 3:16, she says the following, quote, the attitude in prayer. In selected messages that my friend had quoted from, I read that, quote, it is not always necessary to bow upon your knees in order to pray. Cultivate the habit of talking with the Savior when you are alone, when you are walking, and when you are busy with your daily labor, end quote. Now, how do we reconcile? It is always the proper position to kneel, and then you say, but it is not always necessary to bow upon your knees. One person takes one and says, we need to pray all the time, and the other one says, well, I don't think so.
Well, when I'm in town, I'm always praying for people, even if they're driving down the street. When I'm on the bus, I pray for people. When I'm passing out the things that I pass out, Seventh-day things, I pray for people. And
On your knees?
no.
See?
I don't know if God hears me.
So, how, yes. All right. Whom did she target when she made the first statement in selected messages, page 311? Whom did she target there, and then how did she balance it out? If you understand that, it makes immediately sense. Obviously, in Battle Creek College, there were people who were very irreverent. Now, that happens in our schools as well, right? You go into a chapel, and then what do the people do? They have their feet up, they sleep, they eat, they watch movies. And Ellen White speaks in that context and says, you guys, you should always go on kneeling because you are behaving irreverently here. And that's where she makes the statement. The proper position always for prayer is on our knees. But then she goes on, she goes further on, and while she zooms out of the specific audience that she has in mind, when she says the position is always on your knees because you are not reverent, and she says it is not always necessary to pray, but we should cultivate a habit of praying. Yeah? But you understand, to an audience, and let me tell you, if she would be at Andrews University, sometimes in our chapels, you would probably say these guys need to walk out of the chapel, not only to go down on their knees when they pray. Right? So, but when she zooms out from this targeted audience, she says it is not always necessary to kneel in prayer. So, when we have a statement, what should we do when we have an information on a certain issue? We should get, first of all, the context, and then we should see how does she address the same context in other writings, or maybe, like in this page, in this case, only a few pages further on. But you see, what we very often do, we find something, and that's what we like, and that is our strength, but it is your weakness, and then I have something for you to give you in Sabbath school. And say, sister, how come that you are not kneeling in prayer? And right again, I have you.
I kneel when I pray.
Hallelujah. So, are we together? Yes, ma'am, please. Yes. Please, we have a question. We want to make sure that we show reverence, yeah, when we're coming into the house of God and whatnot. Now, Ellen White goes on to say, if you are reading about prayer, she talks about she prayed in bed, while laying in bed. If she could not sleep, she would pray. Or she turned around. She didn't turn around and knelt. She has been at camp meetings, and at the last general conference she attended, and she had the people stand, and she stood and she prayed standing. And your pastor just said, we have examples in the Bible where people have stood. Remember Luke chapter 18? The tax collector and the Pharisee come into the temple, and what do? One stands here and the other stands here, and the one says, I'm thankful that I'm not like this jerk. And what does this jerk do? The so-called jerk, what does it say? Be merciful to me, the sinner. And who goes justified from the temple? And how did he pray? While standing. Are you with me? He was not kneeling. Yeah? So when we are dealing with a topic like this, we want to make sure that we take all the statements that she makes about that into account. Don't just take what you like, or don't just take one and say, okay, now everybody needs to be combed with the same comb. Because for some, the comb might apply. And if you are bold, it might not really apply for you. Avoid extreme interpretation, that's another one. Stephen Haskell, avoid extreme interpretations, yeah? Avoid extreme readings, avoid extreme interpretations. Stephen Haskell, this was the guy, you know who Stephen Haskell was? He was a conference president in Wisconsin. He was the guy who got into healthful living, who gave up pork before Ellen White, and he encouraged both the Whites, James as well as Ellen White, to give up eating pork, because remember, in the 40s they are still eating pork, right? And in the 60s too. And Ellen White says, the Lord will lead us in groups. He will not just reveal himself to individuals. And God is patient, and he moves us all forward. And Stephen Haskell was the guy when Ellen White's husband, James, died. He was the one who proposed to her, and she said no, that she's not going to remarry again and change her name. So Stephen Haskell, a prominent Seventh-day Adventist minister during the last quarter of the 19th century, returned to the United States after a tour of duty in Australia to discover many, quote, queer doctrines preached by some of the leading ministers on the rising generation. As might be expected, they quoted from the testimonies and the Bible to prove their point. So much so that one not grounded in the principles of the Adventist message would be carried away with them. Some of the strange doctrines I have heard, reported Haskell, is the seal of God cannot be placed on any person of gray hairs or any deformed person, for in that closing work we would reach the state of perfection both physically and spiritually, where we would be healed from all physical deformities and then could not die, etc. Extreme interpretations. If you have any handicap, the seal of God cannot be placed upon you. If you are gray, well, we have quite a bit of us here, right? Happy, ma'am, that you're not yet gray, right? So, all right, the other one. 7 weeks later, Haskell had to deal with a related extremist teaching that on the basis of the Ten Commandments, it was wrong to kill poisonous snakes or harmful insects. Thou shalt not kill. Extreme interpretations, right? Playing games, in plunging into amusement, match games, pugilistic performances. Ellen White wrote that the students at Battle Creek College declared to the world that Christ was not their leader in any of these things. So, some students, both in Avondale, where she was in Australia, and then in Battle Creek College, engaged in amusements, match games, pugilistic performances, and so on. And she was against that. What conclusions have they drawn from that? We should never play any sports, right? Now, it's one thing if you're talking competitive sport. What if tomorrow our young people... Look what Ellen White... Kicking a ball is a good exercise to bind with your students. She says, I do not condemn the simple exercise of playing ball. Yet somebody else takes the other statement and says, look, we can never kick a ball because it is pugilistic performances. Now, if it is pugilistic performances, better leave it. But if it is simple ball kicking to bond with your students, that's what I do. For example, I do right now an intensive class in Greek, and I have 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening. You understand, if you torture students for 4 hours in Greek with a foreign language in the morning and 4 hours in the afternoon, I go out with them, and of course the class right now, they're not much into soccer, they're into basketball. I don't know much about basketball. I say, bring on the ball. And then we go to a court, and then I dare with them, and then they kick me around, and I'll try to shoot, and I miss most of the time, but I engage with the why. Because they need to understand that I try to be their friend. I'm not there to fail them. I'm not trying to, I'm trying to be a body with them. At least when we're on the court field, yes. In the classroom, I have to say, look, we need to start, we need to finish, we need to do this, that, and the other, and they understand that. But it's important that you engage with your students, and you do a little. You might not be a soccer player, that's fine. You might not play in the NBA, that's fine. But you just engage in a little bit of playing the ball with the students to draw them to yourself. Oh, yeah.
I have a question. I didn't know if games, I wasn't thinking of sports, I was thinking of family nights when you play Monopoly and checkers and that kind of stuff, chess.
So, what is your question?
Is it okay to do that?
I think if you are not trying to overdo it in spending the time with it, if you are not going to make this a competitive sport or a competitive game, there's nothing bad in having a board game with your kids or with your grandkids. Your grandkids need to see that grandma engages with them. If you only read the red books, they say, thanks, grandma. We know what you have. You need to be engaging with your kids. I'm not saying try to sin with them, right? But engage with them. Be a friend to them. Be a kid. You once used to be a kid. You might say, hey, my knees don't make it, but you know, I can play a board game with you. Oh, yeah. Card playing was used. People used to play cards, chess, card playing for money. They would lose their whole household. And that's what the background for this strong statement against that is. Yeah. Now, I just found the quote, the statement, the one with the eggs and Dr. Kress. Kress replied to Ellen White after Kress got the message and after Kress understood that Ellen White has his health in mind. Kress replied to Ellen White the next month. I quote, I can see that the strong view I held with reference to the milk and egg question placed me in danger of going too extreme, and I feel very thankful that the Lord has corrected me. So Cress was not opposed to the counsel of Ellen White. He said, thank you that you have corrected me. Now, with reference to myself, as far as I know, I am following out carefully all the instructions that God has sent me through you. I'm using both the eggs and the milk, and I'm able to do so without a prick of conscience now. Before this, I could not do it without feeling condemned. And I really believe there is hope for me being restored to health, else the Lord would not have sent this message. Speaking further on, 43 years later, Cress reflected back on his experience. Quote, some honest souls have taken an extreme position in regard to some of the statements made by Sister White regarding the use of animal food products, especially milk and eggs. Speaking to his own extremes, he said, quote, I ran down in health almost to the point of death. Sister White saw me in vision and wrote me several letters, pointing out the cause of my condition and urging me to make a change in my dietetic habits. After receiving this message, I at once began making reforms by using eggs and directed, and milk, and with God's blessing I made a good recovery. This was over 40 years ago. I have now about reached my 82nd year of life, and I'm still able to spend 3 hours daily in my office in the sanatorium. For the health so graciously granted me, I'm indebted to the messages that came to me at a time when a recovery seemed hopeless from a human standpoint. I still follow out instructions by using milk and eggs, end quote. So, this guy was not opposed to listening to Ellen White. Let's do a few more and then I'll quit here and I will take a little bit of a break before we go into the answer and question thing. Time and place take into consideration. George and I talks about that he was a principal of a school and the parents came and said, hey, the girl should have shorter skirts, right? And George and I says to shorten some of the skirts that I had seen in the late 1960s and early 70s by 8 or 9 inches would have put the bottom of the hemline somewhere above the top of the waistband. So she also gave counsel on courting. For example, she said, we could not allow any courting or forming attachments at the school. Girls with young men and young men with girls. End quote. 1897. She wrote this while she was in Avondale. And she said, we cannot allow our girls and our boys any courting. And then Irvin became principal of Avondale, the former principal of Avondale College came to PUC, became president of PUC. And as the statements of Ellen White came to be put together in a book, he realized that Ellen White changed her things. And Irvin was shocked to find the strict courtship statement he had been enforced missing from the new book. In its place, he found a much milder statement with the following qualifications. Quote, in all our dealings with students, age and character must be taken into account. We cannot treat the young and the old just alike. There are circumstances under which men and women of sound experience and good standing may be granted some privileges not given to the younger students. The age, the conditions, and the turn of mind must be taken into consideration. What happened in Avondale and what was the difference at PUC? In Avondale, the students were 16 years old. And Ellen White said, we cannot, we should not, we must not allow bindings between girls and boys at the age of 16. When the context became PUC, where we have elderly students in their early 20s, she says, we might allow to some student privileges we might not allow to young students, depending on their experience and depending on their maturity. Are you with me? So, time and place need to be taken into consideration. Let me tell you one more. Study each statement in its literary context. Ellen White says, for example, where is it? Eating fruits and vegetables at the same time. Quote, "It is not well to eat fruit and vegetables at the same meal." Ministry of Healing, page 299. Some take that statement out of its literary context, have made it into a rule applicable to all. But they need to read on. The very next words declare, quote, "If the digestion is feeble, the use of both will often cause distress and inability to put forth mental effort," end quote. So what do we very often do? What do we say? Fruits and vegetables should not be eaten at the same time. And most of us, like you said, our body kind of signals it to us if it is good or not, right? Because what is the problem with food and vegetables at the same time? Sorry? Right. Fruits being soft, digest fast. Vegetables being harder, digest slower. The fruits, they produce gas, right? Because fermentation starts, because they want to be eliminated, yet the vegetables are not yet digested. So, and then we have blowings and all kind of things, right? And we don't feel well. But what did she say? Fruits and vegetables, if your digestion is feeble. Oh, if you take here, Nathaniel, take a 20-year-old boy, you can throw in him rocks and vegetables and fruits, and everything is going to be digested. It's not a problem. Now, you and I, we might not get it with the rocks, right? Maybe with the fruits and the fruits, but not with the fruit and yeah, you understand? If the digestion is feeble, so we need to take into consideration. Read further on. What does she say? Time and place, all of the statements. And this is how we interpret Scripture. We go and see if Jesus says, pluck out your eyes, cut off your hands. We are saying, what is this? Is this hyperbolic language? That's what we apply it for. When Ellen White says, the most important job in the Battle Creek College is that of the cook. And then a few pages further on, she says, the most important job at Battle Creek College is the pastoral job. And then a little bit further, she says, the most important job is the teacher's. No, Sister White, which one is the most important?
They're all the most important.
They're all. But you see, sometimes she uses hyperbolic language. I die of thirst. The most important. Now, we are saying most important is a superlative, and there's nothing more superlative than a superlative, right? So that's the most important job. We need to take those kind of statements into consideration as well. We need to make sure that we are reading all of it. We need to make sure that we understand what the context is. We need to understand what the time is. When she talks about the bike craze in Battle Creek, do you guys fiddle around today? Do you still make a controversy over somebody who has a bike? But if all of you would be in the latest Porsche that comes out of Stuttgart, then we would have a problem, right? So you get the point. So time and place, all her statement. Don't emphasize the irrelevant. Is shaving or growing beards excluding you from the kingdom? Long or short towels at the Lord's communion? Sorry? Or wearing pajamas. So. All right. So, the point that I want to make today in this presentation is Ellen White needs to be interpreted like we interpret the Bible, like we interpret the words of Jesus. And in order to do that, we need to consider time, place, all the statements that she makes about that topic. And not take just something and run with it. No eggs? Everybody no eggs. because obviously she said no eggs and raw eggs. Yeah? We need to emphasize the important, not the unimportant things. Yes, Pastor? No, okay, no, I didn't want to talk about it. You want to say something about that? No.
I think the devil wants us to fight about those things.
Yeah.
He wants us to get caught up on the little,
Yeah.
minute, itty
Yeah.
bitty.
I could talk much more on that, but I don't want, I think I gave you the idea of what to do. When somebody says, this is what Ellen White says, and it is odd to you, you just think, oh, is it really? Don't try to fight. If you go home, nowadays, having the White estate online so easily accessible, and see, does it make sense? Is whenever somebody makes a strong statement that you feel, I'm not sure, look and see. Why did Ellen White make that statement? To whom did she make that statement? What were the reasons? What were the circumstances? Figure it out and say, okay, is that applicable to us? And that's what the pastor says, principles versus policy. Yeah, we need to figure out the principles. The same stuff we do with the Bible, right? When Joshua fought a battle at Jericho, for us the principle comes out there, right? We need to figure out what is the principle, and that's what we apply to us. Now, the good thing is that the writings of Ellen White are not 2,000 years old, they're only 150 some years old, right? So they are closer to our time. But still, we cannot apply everything one-to-one. We don't read the Bible literally and say, okay, if it says plug out your eyes, we plug out our eyes. And since we don't do that and we interpret the Bible, we also need to interpret Ellen White. Now, I need to warn, because some people, when they say we interpret, then they pick and choose. That's not what I'm saying. It's not, hey, pick and choose what you like and what you don't like, kind of, oh, that's spiritual, that's not for me. If the Lord discloses us something and the Lord, through the prophet, speaks to us, then the Lord speaks to us because he wants our best. Correct? The prophets have warned the people. The prophets have drawn the people closer to God. When God speaks through a prophet, God sees an issue, and then when she spoke to Dr. Kresh, she wanted to save his life. Now, Kresh could have said, hey, I don't like it what you're saying. I stick with your first statement. But he was open enough, and he took it. Yeah? So, and if we get into issues and some statements seem too extreme, just take it in, don't argue over it, go and figure it out, say, and then say, hey, brother, sister, next Sabbath, I looked into this issue. You know what she also says? We should not always kneel in prayer. And then say, oh, how do you reconcile the statement with always kneeling on prayer with the statement not always kneeling on prayer? Yeah? And then try to bring the two together and see, why does she say one, why does she say the other? Okay, so, yes, any questions? And then we'll wrap it up here, have a break, and then come back for a Q&A, and then, shall we, yeah, we'll break and then do Q&A afterwards. So, you have a comment, please? Okay. Keep that question in mind, and let's bring that the first thing in when we're coming back. The question is, maybe you can think about it, does culture affect our reading, our understanding of Ellen White? Yeah, that's your question. Very good question. Let's keep that in mind. So, any other comment that you have? If not, let's close. Who would like to lead us in a, I have no monopoly on prayer. Who would like to lead us in a closing prayer? We take a 10-minute, 15 minutes break, and then we'll come back for the Q&A session. Yes, please. Lead us in a word of prayer, please.
Holy Father, thank you for tonight.